Welcome to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. The Bible tells one big story of redemption, and we want to spend 5 minutes every day journeying through the Bible from start to finish and exploring how all of it points to Jesus.
Hey everybody, welcome back to A Year in the Bible with Daily Grace. My name is Jenny, and today we are getting into the book of Lamentations. First, I'm going to give you a little background for Lamentations. Lamentations is a book of poetry believed to be written by Jeremiah. He wrote Lamentations after the destruction of Jerusalem and the temple when the people of Judah were exiled to Babylon. As you may remember from other books in the Old Testament, prophets like Isaiah and Jeremiah had warned Judah for years that if they did not turn from their sinful ways and go back to God, then they would be destroyed. Unfortunately, they did not take heed of the prophets' warnings, and they were eventually exiled into Babylon. As for the structure of Lamentation, there are 5 poems in acoustic form, which means that certain letters in each line form a word. In this case, each verse begins with a letter of the Hebrew alphabet in successive order. This pattern is broken in the 5th poem. However, there are still 22 verses, each verse representing a letter of the Hebrew alphabet. This shows us that the author of Lamentations is covering the topic of suffering as much as he can. Now to get into today's reading. Chapter 1 opens by explaining how complete Judah's suffering is. However, their suffering was not undeserved. They had chased after other gods. Some of these gods even required atrocities such as child sacrifice, and God had given them chance after chance to turn back, but they refused. This is why the first poem describes the now fallen Jerusalem as a woman in mourning who has no one to comfort her. However, it is important to note that the author of Lamentations also recognizes that the Lord is just, as it is explained in chapter 1, verse 18. And we should be thankful that we do not serve a God who is okay with child sacrifice or oppressing the vulnerable. It is also interesting to note, as we work through Lamentations, that God uses Babylon as his agent of discipline and judgment against his own people. There is nothing more terrifying than facing God's wrath. Chapter 2 provides detail after detail about how the Lord has come against Judah. And as we read these details, we realize the greatness of God's wrath. In fact, God's wrath is so great that the author writes that their eyes are worn out from weeping, and that God summons those who terrorize Jerusalem on every side. And just when it seems like the author cannot take any more, chapter 3 offers relief. In Lamentations 3, we are introduced to the suffering servant who takes on the weight of Judah's sin. While Jeremiah may have been talking about himself here, the language actually foreshadows Christ and reminds us of God's mercies. In fact, even among the destruction of Jerusalem and the exile of Judah, the author reminds us that God's mercies are new every morning and that his faithfulness never fails. God is always faithful to fulfill his word, even when it is difficult to see in everyday life or in hard seasons. Reading the book of Lamentations should bring us a sense of relief. We can see how great God's wrath is. Yet we also know that Jesus Christ came back and took our sin upon himself. By doing this, he bore the wrath that should have been ours to bear. It is also through Jesus that we can truly experience God's mercies every day. Reading Lamentations should also bring us hope for today. Jesus has come so that we will never have to bear God's wrath. And not only do we not have to bear God's wrath, we get to have a relationship with him through Jesus Christ. So if you are feeling like you have messed up too much, rest in the truth that Christ came so that you can experience God's mercies every day. He is good, and he will always fulfill his promises, even when you fail to fulfill yours. Thanks again for joining me. I am so happy you tuned in. Also, be sure to follow along on Instagram at The Daily Grace Podcast and at The Daily Grace Co. And check out our website, thedailygraceco.com, for all kinds of resources to help you dive deeper into God's Word. On the website, you can find our Store of Redemption study and journals to accompany this podcast. You can also always find resources to accompany the podcast at thedailygracepodcast.com. Thanks so much, and remember to come back tomorrow for the conclusion of Lamentations.